The candle flames bent sideways as another burst of laughter swept through the dining hall, and Verity Ashford pressed herself deeper into the shadowed alcove beside the towering marble pillar, willing herself to become part of the stone itself. Invisible. That was her purpose here, her profession, her survival. 38 guests filled the dining hall of Hartwell Manor, their jewels catching firelight, their voices rising and falling in the practiced rhythm of aristocratic conversation. Crystal clinked against crystal. Servants moved like ghosts between chairs, and Verity stood motionless against the wall, exactly where a paid companion was expected to stand, present enough to be summoned, absent enough to be forgotten. Lady Dorothea Whitmore had not glanced in her direction for over 2 hours. This was normal. This was correct. Verity's employer required her presence at social events, not for companionship, but for propriety. A respectable young woman to fetch shawls and smelling salts, to listen to complaints during carriage rides home, to exist without existing. Verity had perfected this art across 3 years of service. She knew how to hold her breath when important conversations happened nearby. She knew how to fix her gaze on the middle distance, seeing nothing, remembering everything. She knew how to make her face pleasant but unremarkable, her posture straight but unnoticeable, her entire being a blank space that eyes slid past without registering. Tonight, however, something was different. She felt it before she understood it. A prickling awareness along her skin, a disturbance in the air. Someone was looking at her. Not through her, not past her. At her. Verity's training screamed at her to keep her gaze fixed on the far wall, to ignore the sensation, to remain invisible. But her body betrayed her. Her eyes moved of their own accord, scanning the glittering crowd until they collided with a gaze so direct, so unexpectedly focused, that her breath stopped in her throat. He sat near the head of the table, this man who was watching her. Dark hair swept back from a face carved with angles too sharp for conventional handsomeness. A strong jaw, a blade of a nose, cheekbones that caught shadow and light in equal measure. But it was his eyes that held her paralyzed, gray as winter storms, gray as the moment before lightning strikes, and fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel suddenly, terrifyingly visible. She should look away. Every instinct, every lesson, every survival mechanism demanded it. She didn't. For 3 endless seconds, they stared at each other across the crowded dining hall. The laughter continued around them. The candles flickered. The world moved on, oblivious to the strange electricity crackling between a duke's table and a companion's alcove. Then his lips curved. Not quite a smile, something more curious than that. And he lifted his wine glass in her direction. A toast. An acknowledgement. A catastrophe. Verity's face flooded with heat. She wrenched her gaze away, heart slamming against her ribs, hands trembling where they were clasped at her waist. Had anyone else seen? Was Lady Whitmore watching? Oh God, had she just made eye contact with a nobleman for 3 full seconds, like some desperate social climber? She risked a glance at her employer. Lady Whitmore was deep in conversation with a portly baron, paying no attention to her companion's internal crisis. The guests continued eating, drinking, laughing. No one had noticed. No one except him. Against every shred of judgment she possessed, Verity looked back toward the head of the table. He was still watching her. And this time, there was no mistaking the amusement in those storm-gray eyes. "Who is that?" she heard him ask, his voice carrying across a lull in conversation with the careless authority of someone who expected answers. The question rippled outward. Heads turned. Eyes searched. And suddenly, impossibly, 38 members of London's elite were looking at the shadowed alcove where Verity Ashford stood frozen like a rabbit before wolves. "Your Grace?" The woman beside him, Lady Hartwell, their hostess, followed his gaze with obvious confusion. "I'm not certain I understand. Who is what?" The young woman by the pillar. He gestured with his wineglass, casual and devastating. In the gray dress. I don't believe we've been introduced. Lady Hartwell squinted toward Verity's alcove, her expression shifting from confusion to dismissal. Oh, that's just Lady Whitmore's companion. Nobody of consequence, Your Grace. Shall I have more wine brought? Just. Nobody. Of consequence. The words should not have stung. They were accurate. They were her reality. But hearing them spoken aloud while those gray eyes remained fixed on her face, Verity felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been frozen for a very long time. Nobody of consequence, the Duke repeated slowly, and his tone made Lady Hartwell's smile falter. How fascinating. I find I'm quite curious about nobody of consequence. What's her name? The dining hall had grown quieter now, conversations dimming as guests sensed something interesting unfolding. Lady Whitmore had finally noticed the attention, her face cycling through confusion, alarm, and calculated interest in rapid succession. Her name is Verity Ashford, Your Grace, Lady Whitmore said, her voice carrying across the suddenly attentive room. She's been in my service for 3 years, a very capable girl. Very quiet. Verity. The Duke tasted the name like wine. Truth. How appropriate. And then he did something that would be whispered about in drawing rooms for weeks to come, something that would upend Verity's entire existence. He rose from his chair, set down his wineglass, and walked directly toward her. The distance between the dining table and Verity's alcove could not have been more than 40 feet, but each step the Duke took seemed to stretch time itself. She watched him approach with the horrified fascination of someone witnessing their own destruction, unable to run, unable to hide, unable to do anything but stand there as her carefully constructed invisibility shattered around her. He was taller than she'd realized, broader in the shoulders. He moved with the unconscious grace of someone who had never once worried about taking up too much space, someone whose presence was a right rather than a privilege. When he stopped before her, close enough that she could smell sandalwood and something darker, muskier, her heart was beating so violently, she was certain he could hear it. Miss Ashford. His voice was lower now, meant only for her. You've been standing in this alcove for nearly 3 hours. Your feet must be aching. Of all the things she'd expected him to say, that was not among them. Your Grace, that is... Words tangled on her tongue. She had spent 3 years perfecting the art of silence, and now when speech was required, she could barely remember how language worked. Breathe, he suggested, not unkindly. I'm not going to bite, though I understand why you might assume otherwise, given the circumstances. Verity forced air into her lungs. Forgive me, Your Grace. I'm not accustomed to being... noticed. No, I don't imagine you are. Those gray eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her want to shrink back into the stone. Lady Whitmore keeps you well hidden. One might almost think she's afraid of the competition. There is no competition. The words came out sharper than intended. I am a paid companion. My purpose is to be useful, not visible. And yet here you are, extremely visible. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. Tell me, Miss Ashford, do you always attend dinner parties by standing against walls like a particularly lovely piece of furniture? Lovely. He'd called her lovely. Verity felt her face flame. I attend to Lady Whitmore's needs, Your Grace. That is my position. A position that requires 3 hours of standing in an alcove? His eyebrow arched. What needs precisely are you attending? Behind him, Verity could see the entire dining party watching their exchange with rapt attention. Lady Hartwell looked scandalized. Several young ladies were whispering behind their fans. And Lady Whitmore, her employer's expression was a complicated mixture of alarm and avarice, calculating whether this unexpected attention might somehow benefit her. Your Grace, please. Verity dropped her voice to barely above a whisper. You're creating a scene. People are staring. Let them stare. He said it with the casual dismissiveness of someone who had never once cared about social consequences. "I find I'm rather enjoying this conversation, Miss Ashford. You're the first person tonight who said anything remotely interesting." "I've barely said anything at all." "Precisely. Most people say far too much. You have the gift of economy." He tilted his head, studying her. "How old are you?" 23, Your Grace." "Educated?" "My mother saw to it before she passed. Languages, literature, history, music." "And how did someone with languages, literature, history, and music end up as Lady Whitmore's invisible companion?" The question hit a nerve. Verity felt her spine stiffen. "The same way most women end up in situations they did not choose, Your Grace. Necessity." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. Before he could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Theron, darling, what are you doing?" A young woman appeared at his elbow, dark-haired and bright-eyed, with an elfin face and a smile that suggested she found the entire situation delightful rather than shocking. "You've abandoned poor Octavia mid-sentence and crossed the entire dining hall to speak with." "Oh." Her gaze landed on Verity, and her smile widened. "Oh, how wonderful. You found someone interesting. I knew this dinner party couldn't be a complete waste." "Cosima." The Duke's voice held a note of warning. "Perhaps not now. Perhaps exactly now." The young woman, Cosima, extended her hand to Verity with cheerful disregard for propriety. "I'm Cosima Vane. This brooding creature is my brother, Theron, the Duke of Ashworth. He has a terrible habit of terrifying people without meaning to." "Are you terrified?" Verity blinked. Somewhat, yes." "Excellent. That means you're paying attention." Cosima tucked her arm through Verity's, as if they were old friends. "Come, you must sit with me. I'm dying to know how you ended up pressed against that pillar, like you were hoping it would swallow you." "Cosima," the Duke said again, more firmly. "Miss Ashford is Lady Whitmore's companion. You can't simply abduct her." "I'm not abducting her. I'm rescuing her." Cosima's eyes sparkled with mischief. "There's a difference. Besides, Lady Whitmore owes me a favor from last season. Something about a very unfortunate rumor that I chose not to spread. I'm sure she won't mind lending Miss Ashford to me for the remainder of the evening." Before Verity could protest, before she could explain that this was madness, that paid companions did not sit at dining tables, that she was nobody of consequence and belonged in the alcove, Cosima was already steering her toward the table. "Wait." Verity dug in her heels. "I can't. Lady Whitmore hasn't given permission. This isn't..." "Isn't what?" Cosima turned, still smiling. "Isn't proper? Isn't done? Isn't acceptable?" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The wonderful thing about being a Duke's sister, Miss Ashford, is that I get to decide what's acceptable. And tonight, I've decided that you're going to sit beside me and tell me everything about yourself, while my brother pretends not to listen." Verity looked back at the Duke, searching for rescue or reason. He offered neither. Instead, he simply inclined his head, those storm-gray eyes unreadable. "You might as well surrender, Miss Ashford. My sister is a force of nature. Resistance is futile." And that was how Verity Ashford, invisible companion, nobody of consequence, found herself seated at a dining table among dukes and earls, while Lady Whitmore watched with a calculating gleam, and whispers spread like wildfire through the room. She had no way of knowing that this moment, this strange, impossible, terrifying moment, was only the beginning. The carriage ride back to Lady Whitmore's townhouse was the longest of Verity's life. Her employer sat across from her in the darkened interior, face half illuminated by passing street lamps, expression unreadable. Neither of them had spoken since leaving Hartwell Manor. The silence stretched like a blade being slowly drawn. Verity's mind raced through 1,000 catastrophic scenarios. Dismissal without reference, accusations of impropriety, a reputation ruined before it could even begin to be built. 3 years of careful, invisible service destroyed in a single evening because a duke had decided to look at her. "Well," Lady Whitmore said finally, her voice cutting through the darkness, "that was unexpected." Verity's hands tightened in her lap. "My lady, I must apologize. I never intended—" "Don't." Lady Whitmore held up one gloved hand. "Don't apologize for catching the Duke of Ashworth's attention. Do you have any idea who he is?" "A duke, my lady. Not just any duke." Lady Whitmore leaned forward, and the calculating gleam Verity had noticed at dinner was now a full blaze. "The Duke of Ashworth controls half the shipping interests in the Mediterranean. His family's fortune rivals the crown's. His grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, is one of the most powerful women in society. And his sister Cosima has been impossible to befriend, despite my best efforts for 3 seasons." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Tonight, that same sister practically dragged you to her side and spent 2 hours chattering at you like you were her dearest confidant." Verity didn't know what to say. Cosima's attention had been overwhelming, but genuine. A flood of questions about books and music and travel, punctuated by sharp observations that revealed a keen intelligence beneath the bubbly exterior. And through it all, the Duke had sat nearby, speaking with other guests, but always somehow present. Always, somehow, watching. "What did Lady Cosima talk about?" Lady Whitmore pressed. "Many things, my lady. She asked about my education, my interests, my opinions on various novels. Verity hesitated. "She asked if I was happy in my current position." Lady Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "And what did you tell her?" "The truth, that I was grateful for the security of employment. But not happy." Verity said nothing. Silence was safer than lies. The carriage rolled on through gaslit streets, carrying them toward a reckoning Verity could not yet see. When they finally stopped before Lady Whitmore's townhouse, her employer did not immediately move to exit. "There will be consequences from tonight," Lady Whitmore said slowly. The Duke made his interest quite public. By tomorrow morning, every drawing room in London will be buzzing with questions about the mysterious companion who caught Ashworth's eye. She paused. This could be useful. Verity's stomach dropped. "My lady, the Duke of Ashworth has been a target of matchmaking mamas for 5 years. He's refused every eligible young woman thrown at him, much to his grandmother's despair. If he's shown interest in you, even passing interest, others will wonder why." Lady Whitmore's smile was thin and calculating. "You may have become my most valuable asset, Miss Ashford. We shall see how this unfolds." She exited the carriage without another word, leaving Verity alone with her racing thoughts and the terrible suspicion that her life was no longer her own. The next morning brought chaos. Verity was summoned to the drawing room at an unprecedented 9 o'clock, still straightening her cap and apron. What she found there stopped her in the doorway. Flowers, dozens of arrangements, roses, lilies, orchids, blooms she couldn't even name, covering every available surface. And in the center of it all, Lady Whitmore sat clutching a cream-colored card with an expression of pure astonishment. "They arrived an hour ago," Lady Whitmore said faintly. "All of them. From Ashworth House." Verity's heart began to pound. "All of them? Read this." Lady Whitmore thrust the card toward her. The handwriting was bold and masculine, the message brief. "Miss Ashford, I find I have more questions. My sister requests the pleasure of your company this afternoon for tea. A carriage will arrive at 3. I hope you will accept. Ashworth tea." Lady Whitmore was still staring at the flowers as if they might explode. "He's invited you to tea at Ashworth House with his sister." She turned to Verity with an intensity that bordered on frightening. "Do you understand what this means?" "I'm not certain I understand anything, my lady." "It means opportunity." Lady Whitmore rose, beginning to pace. It means access. If you can befriend Lady Cosima, if you can maintain the Duke's interest even briefly, doors will open. Invitations will arrive. The Whitmore name will be elevated by association. Verity felt a chill spread through her chest. You want me to use their attention for your social advancement? I want you to be smart. Lady Whitmore fixed her with a sharp gaze. You're a companion with no family, no fortune, and no prospects. This is a chance, perhaps the only chance, to leverage something valuable. The Duke may lose interest in a week, a month, but if you play this correctly, you might secure connections that could change your entire future. Play this, like a game, like a strategy. Verity thought of Cosima's bright laugh, her genuine curiosity. She thought of the Duke's storm-gray eyes, the way he'd looked at her like she was worth seeing. Were they simply opportunities to be leveraged? Pieces on a board? And if I refuse? She heard herself ask. Lady Whitmore's expression hardened. Then you'll find yourself seeking new employment by morning, without references. The threat hung in the air, quiet and absolute. Verity had spent years learning to be invisible, swallowing her opinions to maintain security, sending most of her wages home to her father, whose health grew weaker with each passing month. She could not afford to refuse. I'll go, she said quietly. I'll go to tea. The carriage that arrived at 3 o'clock was magnificent, black lacquer with gold trim, the Ashworth crest emblazoned on the door. Verity sat very still in the velvet interior as London rolled past the windows. Ashworth House announced itself through sheer size, a sprawling creamstone edifice that occupied half a city block. Verity's breath caught as the carriage swept through the entrance. This was not her world. This would never be her world. And yet, she was here. Miss Ashford, Cosima's voice rang out before Verity even saw her. A moment later, the Duke's sister appeared from a doorway, practically skipping with excitement. You came. I wasn't entirely certain you would. Come, come. Tea is laid in the blue parlor, and I have approximately 1,000 questions. She seized Verity's hand and pulled her forward with the same cheerful disregard for convention she'd shown at the dinner party. But before they could reach the blue parlor, a voice stopped them both. Cosima, wait. The Duke emerged from a study, his gray eyes finding Verity immediately. He was dressed more casually today. No formal jacket, his shirt sleeves visible beneath a dark waistcoat. And somehow, that made him more intimidating rather than less. Miss Ashford, he said, thank you for coming. I had little choice, Your Grace. The words escaped before Verity could stop them. Your invitation arrived alongside an implicit threat from my employer. A flash of something, annoyance, concern, crossed his features. Lady Whitmore pressured you? Lady Whitmore reminded me that my position depends on remaining useful. Verity lifted her chin, refusing to look away. Your interest has made me unexpectedly useful. I'm here because refusing would cost me my livelihood. Silence fell. Cosima's grip on her hand tightened. Then, remarkably, the Duke smiled. A real smile, transforming his severe features into something almost warm. You truly do say the most interesting things, Miss Ashford. No dissembling, no flattery, just truth. My name means truth, Your Grace. It would be hypocritical to lie. Then let me speak a truth in return. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I invited you here because my sister hasn't stopped talking about you since last night. And because for the first time in longer than I can remember, I met someone who looked at me like I was a problem to be survived rather than a prize to be won. His gaze held hers. I'm not interested in leveraging your situation, Miss Ashford. I'm interested in understanding it. Verity didn't know what to say. In years of service, no one had ever been interested in understanding her. Tea, Cosima interjected, breaking the tension. We'll have tea, and I'll ask my 1,000 questions, and Theron will pretend to read in the corner while actually listening to every word, and by the end of the afternoon, We'll all be friends." She beamed at Verity. "That's my proposal. Do you accept?" It was impossible. It was dangerous. It was everything Lady Whitmore wanted, and nothing Verity had ever dared to want for herself. "Yes," she heard herself say. "I accept." Cosima clapped her hands in delight. The Duke inclined his head, something like satisfaction in his expression, and Verity followed them into the blue parlor, stepping across an invisible threshold into a world where she might impossibly be seen. She didn't know yet that this afternoon would change everything. She didn't know that in 3 weeks she would become the most talked about woman in London. And she certainly didn't know that the Duke watching her from across the parlor was already beginning to fall. The blue parlor was not blue at all, but rather a symphony of soft cerulean and silver, with walls papered in hand-painted Chinese silk, depicting cranes in flight and cherry blossoms drifting on invisible winds. Verity stood just inside the doorway, afraid to move, afraid to touch, afraid her very presence might somehow tarnish the perfection surrounding her. "Sit, sit." Cosima pulled her toward a settee upholstered in velvet so fine it seemed to ripple like water. "You're looking at everything like it might shatter. I promise the furniture won't break." "I'm looking at everything like I've never seen anything so beautiful," Verity admitted quietly. "Because I haven't." Something softened in Cosima's expression. "Then we'll have to show you more beautiful things. Theron, stop lurking in the doorway and come be civilized." The Duke entered with less reluctance than his expression suggested, settling into an armchair across from them with the ease of someone who owned every surface he touched. A footman appeared with tea service, delicate porcelain painted with forget-me-nots, silver pots gleaming, plates of sandwiches and cakes arranged like tiny works of art. Verity watched Cosima pour with practiced grace and accepted a cup with hands she willed not to tremble. The tea was fragrant, rich, nothing like the weak brew she'd grown accustomed to in servants' quarters. "Now," Cosima tucked her feet beneath her with cheerful disregard for posture. "Tell me everything. Where were you born? What books do you love? Have you traveled? Do you play music? What's your opinion on Lord Byron? Genius or scoundrel?" "Both, I should think," Verity answered before she could stop herself. "Most geniuses are scoundrels. The mind that creates beauty is rarely content with ordinary virtue." Cosima laughed with delight. "Oh, I knew I liked you. Theron, she thinks Byron is a beautiful scoundrel. Isn't that perfect? Miss Ashford seems to have opinions on many things." The Duke's voice was mild, but his gaze was sharp with interest. "I suspect. She's been hiding them for years." Verity set down her cup carefully. "Companions are not paid for opinions, Your Grace. We're paid for silence and service." "And which of those costs you more?" The question cut deeper than it should have. Verity looked away, studying the painted cranes on the wall. "The silence," she said finally. "Always the silence." Cosima reached over to squeeze her hand. "Then speak here. Say whatever you like. This room is a sanctuary from propriety. Isn't that right, Theron?" "Within reason." But there was warmth beneath the Duke's dry tone. "Miss Ashford, you mentioned your mother saw to your education before she passed. Tell me about her." It was an unexpected request. People rarely asked about her mother, rarely asked about anything beyond her usefulness. Verity found herself answering despite her caution. "She was a vicar's daughter, educated beyond her station, my father used to say, but she never saw knowledge as a matter of station. She taught me French and Latin before I was 10, made me memorize poetry, insisted I learn to play the pianoforte even when we couldn't afford proper lessons." Verity's throat tightened. "She died when I was 16. Fever. After that, everything changed." "Your father?" Cosima asked gently. "He never recovered. Not in his heart, not in his circumstances. He'd been a solicitor, respectable, successful, but grief made him careless. Bad investments, trusted the wrong partners." Verity heard her own voice grow distant. By the time I was 19, there was nothing left. I took a position as a companion to keep a roof over his head. And he's alive? Your father? Barely. The word caught on old pain. His health has been failing for years. The physician says it's his lungs. I send money when I can, but... She stopped, shaking her head. Forgive me. This is hardly appropriate conversation for tea. This is exactly appropriate conversation for tea, Cosima said firmly. At least, for tea in this house. We don't do shallow here, Miss Ashford. We do real. Verity looked between the siblings, Cosima with her fierce warmth, the Duke with his unreadable gaze, and felt something crack in her chest. She had spent years being invisible, swallowing every thought and feeling to maintain her position. And here were two strangers who seemed to want nothing more than to see her clearly. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. More tea? Cosima asked brightly, already reaching for the pot. The afternoon stretched into evening without Verity noticing. Cosima's 1,000 questions turned into conversation, then debate, then laughter. They discussed poetry and politics, fashion and philosophy. The Duke contributed less often, but with surprising insight when he did, and Verity caught herself looking at him more than was wise, wondering what lay beneath that careful composure. When she finally rose to leave, the sky outside had turned the color of bruised plums. You'll come back, Cosima said. It wasn't a question. Tomorrow. We're attending Lady Sutton's garden party, and you're coming with us. I can't simply... I'll send a note to Lady Whitmore. She'll agree. Cosima's smile held a hint of steel beneath its brightness. Trust me. Verity looked at the Duke, searching for guidance or perhaps warning. He only inclined his head, those storm-gray eyes giving nothing away. Until tomorrow, Miss Ashford. The carriage ride back to Lady Whitmore's townhouse felt like traveling between worlds. For years, she had been invisible, safe, surviving. Now she was being seen by people who mattered, pulled into a world of garden parties and tea parlors, and conversations that actually meant something. It should have felt like a gift. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing the fall was coming, but unable to step back. The garden party at Lady Sutton's estate was a blur of parasols and polite conversation. Verity clinging to Cosima's side like a shipwreck survivor to driftwood. She had never attended such an event as a guest, rather than a shadow. The difference was disorienting. People looked at her now, spoke to her, asked her opinions, as if those opinions mattered. The Duke circled nearby throughout the afternoon, never quite joining their conversations, but always present, always watching. When Verity caught his eye across the manicured lawn, something unnameable passed between them, a current of awareness that made her chest tighten. By the time they returned to Ashworth House for what Cosima called recovery tea, Verity was exhausted in ways she couldn't explain. Social visibility, it turned out, was far more draining than invisibility. You did beautifully, Cosima said, patting her hand. Lady Sinclair actually complimented your wit, and she compliments nothing. You're a natural. I'm a fraud, Verity countered quietly, wearing borrowed dresses and pretending I belong. The dress isn't borrowed. I gave it to you. Which makes it charity. Which makes it a gift between friends. Cosima's voice was firm. Stop arguing and accept that you're remarkable. Before Verity could respond, the parlor door opened. The woman who entered was not old, but ageless, silver-haired and straight-spined, with the Duke's gray eyes and a face carved by decades of authority. She wore black silk as if it were armor, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop several degrees at her appearance. Grandmother. Cosima rose hastily, and Verity followed, her heart sinking. I didn't realize you'd returned from Bath. Clearly. The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth surveyed the parlor with the expression of someone cataloging flaws. Her gaze landed on Verity and stayed there. This, I presume, is the companion everyone is discussing, the one my grandson plucked from obscurity to become his sister's newest project. Miss Verity Ashford, Cosima said carefully. May I present my grandmother, the Dowager Duchess? Verity curtsied as deeply as she knew how. Your Grace. The Dowager moved further into the room, circling Verity with the slow assessment of someone examining livestock. Acceptable posture, tolerable features. The dress is last season's style, but passable. Who educated you? My mother, Your Grace, before her passing. A vicar's daughter, I'm told. Married above herself to a solicitor who subsequently lost everything. The Dowager's voice was cold with facts. Your father is an invalid. Your brother joined the Navy and hasn't been heard from in 2 years. You've been a paid companion to Lady Whitmore for 3 years, earning £30 annually plus board. Is there anything incorrect in my account? Verity's hands trembled at her sides. No, Your Grace. You're remarkably well informed. I'm the Dowager Duchess of Ashworth. It's my business to be informed when strange young women begin inserting themselves into my family. She stopped directly in front of Verity, close enough that the scent of lavender, and something sharper, authority itself, filled the air. What is your purpose here, Miss Ashford? I have no purpose beyond accepting Lady Cosima's kindness. Everyone has a purpose. Don't insult my intelligence with false modesty. The Dowager's gaze sharpened. Do you intend to seduce my grandson? Grandmother, Cosima's voice rose in outrage. I'm asking a legitimate question. The girl appears from nowhere, catches Theron's attention at a dinner party, and suddenly she's attending garden parties and taking tea in the family parlor. The pattern is obvious. Verity felt ice spread through her veins, but she refused to look away. The pattern you're describing, Your Grace, is one of your grandson's making, not mine. He noticed me. He invited me. I was standing in an alcove trying to be invisible when he decided to see me. If you have concerns about intentions, perhaps you should direct them at him. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, remarkably, the Dowager laughed. A short, sharp sound, devoid of warmth, but not entirely unkind. Spine. You actually have spine. How refreshing. She settled into a chair with the regal grace of someone who had never once questioned her right to any seat. Cosima, leave us. But now. Cosima squeezed Verity's hand before departing, shooting her grandmother a look of pure frustration. The door closed, and Verity was alone with the most powerful woman in the Ashworth family. Sit. The Dowager pointed to the settee. You and I are going to have an honest conversation, Miss Ashford. I suspect it may be the most honest conversation you've had in years. Verity sat, her back straight, her heart hammering. My grandson, the Dowager began, has been dead inside since his father passed. Since the weight of the title fell on his shoulders, he has performed his duties with perfect competence and no spark of life. I have paraded eligible young women before him. He has rejected every single one. I'm sorry for your concern, Your Grace, but I don't see what this has to do with— Don't interrupt. The Dowager's voice cracked like a whip. Last night, my grandson left his study voluntarily for the first time in weeks. This morning, he personally selected the flowers to send you. At the garden party, he smiled, actually smiled, when you said something clever about political reform. Do you understand what I'm telling you, Miss Ashford? Verity's mouth went dry. I'm not certain I do. I'm telling you that for the first time since his father's death, something has broken through my grandson's armor, and that something is you. The Dowager leaned forward, her gray eyes intense. I don't know yet whether this is a blessing or a catastrophe, but I know this. Whatever game you're playing, you will not hurt him. If you do, I will ensure you never work in any household in England again. I will ensure your father's care becomes impossible to afford. Do we understand each other?" The threat was absolute, brutal, delivered with the cold certainty of someone who could and would follow through. And yet, "I'm not playing a game, Your Grace." Verity's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I don't want to hurt your grandson or anyone else. I was content being invisible, safe, surviving. Whatever is happening now, I didn't seek it and I don't understand it. But I'm not a villain, and I won't be treated as one simply because your grandson decided I was worth seeing." The Dowager studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not softening, exactly, but recognition. "His father saw me that way once," she said quietly. "Against all advice, against all reason. He looked at a merchant's daughter and decided she was worth the scandal. I spent 40 years proving his faith was justified." She rose, smoothing her skirts. "You may stay for dinner, Miss Ashford. After that, we shall see." She left without another word, leaving Verity alone with a racing heart and the terrible suspicion that she had just passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. Days folded into each other like the pages of a book Verity couldn't stop reading. Cozima's invitations continued. Teas, musicals, walks in the park. And each one pulled Verity deeper into a world she had never dared to want. Lady Whitmore remained suspiciously accommodating, eager for reports and connections, and Verity gave her just enough information to maintain peace while guarding the parts that mattered. The parts that involved the Duke, because despite his sister's cheerful presence at every event, it was Theron who increasingly occupied Verity's thoughts. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as if her words carried weight. The way his rare smiles transformed his severe features into something approaching beauty. The way he seemed to appear whenever she needed rescuing from tedious conversation, materializing at her elbow with dry observations that made her bite back laughter. She was in danger. She knew this, but knowing and stopping were different beasts entirely. One evening, 10 days after their first meeting, Verity found herself alone with him in the Ashworth Library. Cosima had been called away by the Dowager for some mysterious discussion about invitations, and Verity had retreated among the books to wait. The library was vast. 2 stories of shelves connected by a spiral staircase, leather spines, and gilt lettering stretching toward a ceiling painted with constellations. Verity stood at a window, watching rain streak the glass, when she heard footsteps behind her. "You found my hiding place." The Duke's voice was quiet, almost warm. "I should have known you'd gravitate toward books." Verity turned. He stood among the shelves like he belonged to them, lamplight catching the angles of his face. "Your hiding place. My father called it that. Said whenever the weight of everything became too heavy, I could find refuge here. Books don't demand anything. They simply offer worlds to disappear into." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." A shadow crossed Theron's expression. "He was also my best friend. When he died, He stopped, shaking his head. "Forgive me. I don't usually speak of this." "Then don't." Verity moved toward a shelf, giving him space. "We can discuss literature instead. Cosima mentioned you're partial to philosophical texts. I'm more inclined toward novels, myself. Escapism over examination." "Escapism can be its own form of examination." He followed her, stopping close enough that she could smell sandalwood and rain. "What are you escaping from, Verity?" Her name on his lips felt like a key turning in a lock. No one had called her simply Verity in years. Miss Ashford. Girl. You there. But never her name, spoken with that particular weight. "The same thing everyone escapes from," she said quietly. "The life I actually have. The choices that weren't choices. The future I can see stretching ahead like an endless gray corridor. And what future is that? Service until I'm too old to serve. Watching my father decline from a distance I cannot close. never having a home of my own, a purpose of my own, a life that belongs to me, rather than whoever pays my wages. The words spilled out before she could stop them. Honesty she'd kept locked away for years. I was content with invisibility, because contentment was all I could afford. But now, she looked at him, and the truth escaped like a breath held too long. Now I've seen what else exists. Now I know what I'm missing. And that's far crueler than never knowing it all. Theron was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. 3 years ago, my father collapsed during a dinner party. Here, in this house. I was across the city at some meaningless function, performing the heir's duties he'd never wanted to burden me with. By the time I reached him, he was gone. Verity's heart clenched. I'm so sorry. I inherited everything. The title, the estates, the fortune, the responsibilities. He paused, his jaw tightening. What I didn't inherit was any reason to care about any of it. I've spent years performing a role, going through motions, feeling absolutely nothing. And now? The question emerged before Verity could think better of it. Theron turned to face her fully. In the lamplight, his gray eyes held vulnerability, raw and unguarded. Now there's a woman who stands in alcoves pretending to be invisible, he said softly. A woman who argues with my grandmother and means it. A woman who makes me feel something other than duty for the first time since my father died. Verity's breath caught. Your Grace, Theron. His voice dropped lower. We're alone in a library during a rainstorm. I think we've moved beyond formality. Theron. The name felt dangerous on her tongue. This is impossible. You must know that. I'm a paid companion. You're a duke. The distance between us isn't measured in feet. It's measured in entire worlds. I'm aware. He stepped closer, and she could feel the heat of him now, could see the pulse jumping in his throat. I'm aware of every logical reason why I should walk away from this conversation and never seek you out again. But logic hasn't governed my actions since the moment I looked across a dining hall and saw you watching me with those eyes that hold entire universes. I wasn't, you were, and I've been lost ever since. The rain continued its percussion against the windows. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 8 times. The world outside this library continued to spin, indifferent to the seismic shift occurring within. Your grandmother warned me, Verity said, her voice barely a whisper. She said if I hurt you, she would destroy me. Every word was true. I know it was. She warned me as well. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. She said you were either the salvation or the ruin of this family, and she couldn't yet tell which. And what do you believe? His hand rose, hovering near her cheek without quite touching. I believe I've been waiting for you, without knowing I was waiting. I believe invisibility was wasted on someone who deserves to be seen by everyone who has eyes. And I believe... He paused, something shifting in his expression. I believe if I don't kiss you in the next 10 seconds, I may go mad. That would be inadvisable. Extremely. Your grandmother would destroy us both. Undoubtedly. People would talk. Scandal would follow. Your reputation. Verity. Her name again. A prayer and a question. Tell me to stop. She should. Every rational thought, every survival instinct screamed that she should step back, laugh it off, return to the safety of invisibility. Instead, she lifted her chin and met his gaze with all the courage she possessed. I don't want you to stop, he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was the kiss of a man who had been drowning and finally found air. Desperate and hungry and achingly real. His hands cupped her face, his mouth moved against hers, with a passion that stole her breath and her reason. Verity kissed him back with equal abandon, her fingers gripping his waistcoat. Years of silence shattered in a single moment. Years of invisibility burned away in the fire of his touch. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, The library seemed to spin around them. That was, Theron began. A mistake, Verity finished, though her voice held no conviction. A beautiful, terrible mistake. If it was a mistake, it's one I intend to make again. His forehead rested against hers. Stay for dinner. Stay for the week. Stay for however long it takes me to convince you this isn't impossible. Your grandmother will be managed. Lady Whitmore can find another companion. The entire world can burn for all I care. His voice was fierce now. I've spent years caring about nothing, Verity. Let me care about something. Let me care about you. She should refuse. She knew she should refuse. But when had knowing ever stopped the heart from wanting? 1 week, she whispered. I'll stay 1 week, and then we'll see what's possible. His smile broke through the severity of his features, like sunrise through storm clouds. 1 week, he agreed. That's all I need. He kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise rather than desperation, and Verity let herself fall into it, knowing even as she did that she was tumbling toward either the greatest joy of her life or its complete destruction. Perhaps, she thought dimly, they were the same thing. The week Verity had promised stretched into 2, then began creeping toward 3. Lady Whitmore's notes grew increasingly pointed, demanding reports, requesting details, hinting at consequences. Verity responded with carefully crafted half-truths while spending her days at Ashworth House and her nights lying awake, reliving every conversation, every glance, every stolen moment in shadowed corridors. The library kiss had changed everything. Theron had not kissed her again, a restraint that felt both considerate and maddening. But he had made his intentions clear in 1,000 smaller ways. The way his hand lingered when he helped her into carriages. The way he sought her opinion on estate matters, parliamentary debates, the arrangement of gardens. The way he looked at her across crowded rooms with an intensity that made her bones feel liquid. And now the Ashworth ball was upon them. You're going to be magnificent, Cosima declared, surveying Verity in the full-length mirror. The gown was midnight blue silk that caught light like captured stars. Sapphires borrowed from the family vault adorned her throat. She looked like someone else, someone who belonged. I look like a fraud, Verity whispered. You look like a duchess. Cosima's voice was unusually serious. 300 guests are arriving tonight. Give them extraordinary. The Ashworth ballroom was legendary. 3 crystal chandeliers, walls of gilded mirrors, a ceiling painted with Greek mythology. She descended the main staircase on Cosima's arm, hyper-aware of every eye that turned, every whisper that followed. Then she saw Theron waiting at the bottom of the stairs, and everything else ceased to matter. He was devastating in formal evening wear. Black jacket, white cravat. His dark hair swept back to reveal the sharp architecture of his face. When their eyes met, his expression softened into something private, something meant only for her. Miss Ashford. He bowed over her hand, propriety maintained for watching eyes, but his voice dropped to a murmur only she could hear. You've stolen every thought I've had for the past 3 weeks. Tonight, apparently, you intend to steal my breath as well. Heat flooded her cheeks. Your grace is too kind. Your grace is barely containing himself. His thumb traced a secret circle on her palm before releasing her. Save me the first waltz, and the supper dance, and every moment in between that propriety allows. The evening became a blur of introductions, conversations, assessments. Verity felt like a specimen under glass, examined and catalogued by every dowager and debutante in attendance. Some were friendly, genuinely curious about the mysterious companion who'd caught a duke's eye. Others were cold, dismissive, their smiles sharp with contempt. Lady Octavia Mercer was among the latter. She materialized at Verity's elbow, all golden curls and ice-blue eyes. Miss Ashford, how lovely to finally meet you properly. Lady Octavia, Verity kept her tone neutral. "I confess I'm curious about you." A paid companion, suddenly appearing in the Duke's private circle. Octavia stepped closer, her voice dropping to a poisonous whisper. "You do understand this is temporary, don't you? Dukes don't marry companions. You're a novelty. When the season ends, you'll return to your alcoves, and Ashworth will choose someone appropriate. Someone like me." Verity's hands trembled, but she refused to look away. "If you're so confident, why bother warning me? Enjoy your evening, Miss Ashford. It won't last." She glided away, leaving Verity's composure in ruins. The waltz began before Verity could retreat to gather herself. Theron appeared at her side, concern flickering across his features. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing worth repeating." Verity forced a smile. "Shall we dance?" He led her onto the floor, and for a moment, the world contracted to just the two of them. His hand at her waist, her palm pressed to his, the music swelling around them like a tide. "You're trembling," he said quietly. "I'm overwhelmed." "Because of Lady Octavia?" Verity didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was too large, too devastating to speak aloud. That Octavia was right. This was temporary. This was fantasy. And no amount of beautiful gowns or borrowed sapphires could change the fundamental reality of who Verity was and who she would never be. "Look at me," Theron commanded softly. "Whatever poison she poured in your ear, it's lies. I don't want appropriate. I don't want someone like her." His grip tightened. "I want you. You want the version of me dressed in silk and sapphires. But that's not who I am, Theron. I'm 30 pounds a year and mending my own stockings. I'm invisibility and silence, and a future so narrow I can barely breathe." "Then let me give you a different future." The waltz ended. They stood frozen, surrounded by applause they didn't hear. But she was already pulling away, retreating into the crowd, searching for a shadow to disappear into. She found one in a deserted gallery. The dowager emerged from the shadows. "Running away, Miss Ashford? How predictable." Lady Octavia spoke truths I didn't want to hear. I know precisely what she said. The dowager paused. "Come, there's something you need to see." She didn't wait for agreement, simply turned and walked deeper into the gallery. Verity followed, curiosity overcoming caution. They stopped before a portrait she hadn't noticed. A young woman in an outdated gown, dark-haired and serious-faced, with eyes that held something fierce and unbroken. "My wedding portrait," the dowager said, "painted 53 years ago when I was 19 and utterly terrified." Verity studied the image. "You don't look terrified." "I was skilled at hiding it. Necessary when one is a merchant's daughter who's somehow convinced a duke's heir to propose." The dowager's voice softened fractionally. "I was told I was temporary. A novelty. A scandal that would ruin the family name. I was told to leave before I destroyed everything. But you stayed. I stayed. And I spent 50 years proving everyone wrong." The dowager turned to face her. "My husband loved me until his final breath. My son grew up in a house full of that love. And every person who predicted my failure is now dust, while I remain. Dowager Duchess of Ashworth, mistress of this house, keeper of this family." Verity's throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because my grandson is in that ballroom, watching the doors like a man waiting for execution, wondering if he's lost you already." The dowager's eyes were steel and silver. "Because you have something I recognize. That fierce, unbroken core that refuses to surrender. And because, despite my better judgment, I find I don't want you to leave." "Your Grace, don't mistake this for blessing." The dowager's voice hardened again. "You still have to prove yourself. You still have to survive what's coming. But you won't do it by hiding in galleries." She pressed something cold into Verity's palm, a ring, heavy with diamonds. "That belonged to my grandmother. It's been in this family for 4 generations." The dowager held her gaze. Earn it, Miss Ashford. Show me the woman my grandson sees." Then she was gone, leaving Verity alone with a ring worth more than her father's house, and a choice that would shape everything that followed. Verity returned to the ballroom with the ring hidden in her glove, and her heart in her throat. She found Theron exactly where the Dowager had described, near the entrance, watching the doors, his expression carefully blank, in a way that somehow made his anguish more visible. When he saw her approaching, the relief that flooded his features was almost painful to witness. "You came back." He spoke quietly, for her alone. I almost didn't. "What changed?" Verity thought of the portrait, the ring, the Dowager's impossible confession. "Your grandmother showed me a painting." His eyebrows rose. "She spoke to you?" "She told me to earn my place." Verity met his gaze. "She told me to show her the woman you see." Something shifted in Theron's expression, surprise giving way to something deeper, something that looked dangerously like hope. "And what did you decide?" "I decided that I've spent years being invisible because it was safe, because disappearing was easier than fighting for anything." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "I'm tired of disappearing, Theron. I'm tired of being the version of myself that survives, instead of the version that lives." The music swelled around them, couples moving through another waltz, but neither of them moved. "What are you saying?" His voice was rough. "I'm saying that Lady Octavia was right about one thing. This is temporary. Everything is temporary. Life is temporary." Verity felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "But if I have to choose between a lifetime of safe invisibility and one season of being seen by you, I choose being seen. Whatever comes after, whatever destruction follows, I choose this." Theron didn't speak. Instead, he took her hand in full view of 300 guests and pressed his lips to her gloved knuckles. The gesture was simple. The implications were explosive. Whispers detonated through the ballroom. Fans snapped open to hide scandalized expressions. Somewhere, a dowager gasped loud enough to be heard across the room. "That," Lady Octavia's voice cut through the murmurs, "is the most pathetic display I've ever witnessed." She stood nearby, having apparently waited for precisely this moment. Her beautiful face was twisted with something beyond mere jealousy, a fury that spoke of thwarted expectations and wounded pride. A duke brought to his knees by a paid servant. Octavia's voice carried, deliberately audible to everyone nearby. "Your father must be spinning in his grave, Ashworth. To think the great family would be reduced to this, consorting with charity cases and calling it romance." The ballroom fell silent. 300 guests held their breath. Verity felt the blood drain from her face. This was it. The destruction she'd feared, happening in real time, witnessed by everyone who mattered. But before she could speak, before she could flee, Theron straightened to his full height. His expression had gone cold, in a way she'd never seen. Not withdrawn, but dangerous. The face of a man who commanded ships and influenced parliaments, and had never once backed down from a fight. "Lady Octavia," his voice carried across the silent ballroom like ice. "You have spent 3 seasons attempting to secure my attention through manipulation, gossip, and increasingly desperate social maneuvering. I have tolerated it because your father was a friend of my family, and because direct confrontation seemed unnecessarily cruel." He stepped forward, placing himself between Octavia and Verity. "That tolerance ends now." Octavia's face went white. "Your Grace, you were merely revealing your character to everyone present. For that, I suppose I should thank you." Theron's gaze swept the watching crowd. "Let me be clear, since there seems to be some confusion. Miss Ashford is not my charity case. She is not my temporary amusement. She is the woman I intend to marry, and anyone who speaks of her with disrespect speaks of the future Duchess of Ashworth." The words landed like thunderclaps. Future Duchess. Intend to marry. Verity's knees threatened to buckle. She gripped his arm without thinking. Whether for support or to stop him, she couldn't tell. "Theron," she whispered. "What are you doing?" He turned to face her, and his expression transformed, from cold authority to something vulnerable, something true. "I'm choosing you, publicly, permanently, with no possibility of retreat. You can't just announce, I just did." He raised her hand again, and this time, when he kissed it, there was nothing proper about the gesture. "The question is whether you'll accept." The ballroom waited, 300 people watching, judging, cataloging every breath and expression for tomorrow's gossip. This was the moment that would define everything: her future, his reputation, their shared fate. Verity thought of her father's declining health, her mother's buried dreams, and the years of silence and invisibility that had hollowed her out from the inside. She thought of Octavia's cruelty, and the Dowager's challenge, and Cosima's fierce friendship. She thought of Theron, who had looked across a crowded room and seen her when no one else had bothered to look at all. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I accept." The chaos that followed was immediate and overwhelming. Cosima rushed forward with tears streaming down her face. The Dowager watched from across the room with an expression Verity couldn't read. Lady Whitmore looked simultaneously triumphant and furious. And Octavia turned and fled, her social destruction complete. But Verity barely noticed any of it, because Theron was pulling her close, propriety be damned, and whispering against her hair. "I would have waited. I would have done this properly, gradually, given you time to adjust." "Why didn't you?" "Because I couldn't let her hurt you." His arms tightened. "Because the thought of you believing her lies, of you running again, I couldn't bear it. Not when the truth was so simple." "And what truth is that?" He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "That I love you. That I've loved you since you looked at me in that dining hall, like I was a problem to be survived rather than a prize to be won. That I will spend the rest of my life proving you were worth every scandal, every whisper, every moment of chaos we're about to endure." Verity wanted to cry, wanted to laugh, wanted to pinch herself and confirm this was reality, and not some fever dream born of exhaustion and longing. Instead, she said simply, "I love you too." And when he kissed her, right there in the middle of his own ballroom with 300 witnesses and a lifetime of consequences awaiting, she didn't feel invisible at all. She felt seen. The week following the ball was a tempest of congratulations, scrutiny, and whispered speculation. Society columnists devoted entire pages to the Duke of Ashworth's shocking announcement. Drawing rooms buzzed with competing theories. She was secretly nobility. She was carrying his child. She had enchanted him with witchcraft. Each rumor was more absurd than the last, and each one carved a little deeper into Verity's precarious sense of belonging. But she had Theron. She had Cosima's fierce support. She had even, impossibly, the Dowager's grudging acceptance. What she didn't have was peace. It came on the 8th day, in the form of a letter delivered to Ashworth House by a rider who'd nearly killed his horse reaching London from the north. Verity recognized her father's handwriting on the envelope. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. The words blurred together through sudden tears. "Taken ill. Physician says days, perhaps hours. Come if you can. Come quickly." She was packing before she'd finished reading, throwing necessities into a valise with shaking hands. Theron found her 20 minutes later, tears streaming down her face, the letter crumpled in her fist. "Verity, what's happened?" She couldn't speak, could only hand him the letter and watch his expression shift from confusion to horror to grim determination. "I'll arrange a carriage. We can leave within the hour." "You can't come with me." The words tore at her throat. "You have Parliament tomorrow. The trade agreements. You said yourself they can't proceed without your vote." "Nothing in Parliament matters more than this." Everything in Parliament matters more than this. Verity forced herself to breathe. Hundreds of workers depend on those agreements. Families, livelihoods. You cannot abandon them because my father is dying. Verity. No. She gripped his arms, fierce and desperate. Listen to me. I need to go alone. I need to say goodbye to him. And I need to do it without worrying about what my absence costs you. Please, let me do this. The agony in his eyes nearly broke her resolve, but she held firm, and eventually he nodded. I'll come the moment Parliament concludes. 2 days, 3 at most. That may be too late. Then write to me, every hour if you can. Let me be there in some form, even if I can't be there in person. They left within the hour. Verity in a private carriage with Cosima as companion, Theron watching from the steps of Ashworth House, with an expression that haunted her dreams for the entire journey north. Her father died before she reached him. The physician met her at the door of the tiny cottage, where Edmund Ashford had spent his final years. His face told her everything before his words confirmed it. I'm sorry, Miss Ashford. He passed peacefully, about an hour ago. He was asking for you at the end. The world went gray. Verity didn't remember entering the cottage, didn't remember collapsing beside the bed where her father's body lay. She remembered only the sound of her own sobbing, great racking gasps of grief that seemed to tear her apart from the inside. He was gone, the last parent, the last anchor, the last tie to the life she'd lived before balls and dukes and impossible promises. She was alone. Cosima stayed with her through the funeral, through the terrible business of closing her father's affairs, through the long nights when grief swallowed her whole. Letters arrived from Theron, pages of love and comfort and desperate wishes that he could be there, but they felt like messages from another world. On the 5th day, a different letter arrived. Lady Whitmore's handwriting was sharp and unmistakable. Miss Ashford, I hope this finds you adequately recovered from your bereavement. I write to inform you that your position in my household has been terminated, effective immediately. Your belongings have been boxed and will be held for 30 days before disposal. Additionally, I have taken the liberty of informing certain interested parties about the true nature of your origins, specifically your father's disgrace, your brother's abandonment, and the precise circumstances under which you entered service. I felt it was my duty to ensure the Duke of Ashworth understood exactly what manner of woman he has attached himself to. I do hope this information does not unduly complicate your situation, though I suspect it may. Lady D. Whitmore Verity read the letter 3 times before its meaning fully penetrated. Lady Whitmore had exposed everything. Every shameful detail Verity had worked so hard to bury. Her father's failed investments, his ruined reputation, the whispers of dishonesty that had followed their family. All of it, laid bare for Theron and his grandmother, and everyone who mattered. As if to confirm her fears, a second letter arrived that same afternoon. This one bore the Ashworth seal. The Dowager's handwriting was elegant and utterly cold. Miss Ashford, recent information has come to my attention regarding your family's history, specifically allegations of fraud and financial misconduct that cast serious doubt on your suitability as a match for my grandson. I have urged Ashworth to reconsider his attachment. He has, thus far, refused. However, I feel compelled to be direct. If these allegations prove true, there can be no marriage. The Ashworth name cannot be tainted by association with scandal of this nature. I suggest you consider carefully whether your continued presence serves anyone's interests, including your own. A V, Dowager Duchess of Ashworth, the ring, the Dowager's ring, still hidden in Verity's valise, seemed to burn against her awareness. Earn it, the Dowager had said. Show me the woman my grandson sees. But how could she earn anything now? How could she fight for a future that had just collapsed into rubble? She thought of Theron, his fierce declaration at the ball, his promises of permanence, his love, which had felt so unshakable just days ago. Would it survive this? Could it? Or would he see now what she had always known, that she was nobody, nothing, a woman built on foundations of loss and shame, unworthy of everything he'd offered? Verity made her decision in the gray light of dawn. She wrote 2 letters. The first was to Cosima, thanking her for everything, and explaining that she needed time alone to grieve and think, that she would write when she was ready, that she was sorry for any pain this caused. The second was to Theron. My love, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Please don't come after me. Please don't search. What I'm doing is necessary. For you, for your family, for the future you deserve. Lady Whitmore has told the truth. My father was suspected of fraud. Our name carries shame I cannot escape. Your grandmother is right to question my suitability. I should have told you myself, but I was afraid. Afraid you would see me differently. Afraid you would realize your mistake. I love you. I will always love you. But loving you doesn't make me worthy of you. And staying will only cause more damage to everyone involved. Please forgive me. Please forget me. Please find someone who deserves the life you're offering. Yours, in truth and in farewell, Verity. She left before sunrise, slipping away while Cosima slept. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know what came next. She knew only that she was invisible again, and this time, the invisibility was a mercy. 3 days passed. Verity found lodging in a boarding house in a town whose name she didn't bother to learn. The room was small, cold, and impersonal, a perfect mirror for the emptiness inside her. She spent hours staring at walls, unable to sleep, unable to eat, unable to imagine any version of the future that didn't taste like ash. On the 4th morning, someone knocked on her door. She ignored it. Whoever it was, landlady demanding rent, traveler with the wrong room, didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. The knock came again, more insistent. Go away, Verity called hoarsely. Verity Ashford, if you don't open this door in the next 10 seconds, I'm going to have it broken down. The voice was female, furious, and unmistakably Cosima's. Verity opened the door. Cosima stood in the corridor, travel-stained and wild-haired, and angrier than Verity had ever seen her. Behind her loomed a figure that made Verity's heart stop. Theron Fontainton. You, Cosima said, pointing at Verity with a shaking finger, are the most impossible, infuriating, self-sacrificing fool I have ever met. Do you have any idea what you've put us through? How did you find me? We've been searching for 4 days, every inn, every coaching house, every town between here and London. Cosima pushed past her into the room, wrinkling her nose at the sparse furnishings. Theron hasn't slept. I've barely eaten. Grandmother is beside herself, which I didn't think was possible. Verity's gaze moved to Theron, who stood frozen in the doorway. He looked terrible. Shadows beneath his eyes, his jaw rough with stubble, and his usually immaculate clothes wrinkled and travel-worn. He looked at her like a man seeing water after days in the desert. You left, he said. His voice was raw, cracked. You promised me a lifetime, and then you left. I explained in my letter. Your letter was nonsense. He stepped into the room, and the intensity of his presence made the small space feel even smaller. Shame? Scandal? You think I care about your father's reputation? Your grandmother. My grandmother is the one who told me where to look. She remembered you mentioning a town your mother loved, a place you visited as a child. He stopped before her, close enough to touch but not touching. She's been helping us search, Verity. She wants you found. Verity shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. That doesn't make sense. Her letter said, her letter was a test, another damned test. His laugh was bitter. She wanted to see what you would do when faced with opposition, whether you would fight or flee, whether you were worthy of the family name. And I fled. I failed her test. You did what you thought was best for everyone except yourself." Theron's hands rose to cup her face, gentle despite the desperation in his eyes. "That's not failure. That's love. Misguided, infuriating love. But love nonetheless." Cosima cleared her throat. "I'm going to find tea and give you two approximately 15 minutes of privacy. Try not to waste it." She vanished, leaving them alone. The silence stretched like a held breath. "I can't let you do this," Verity whispered. "I can't let you sacrifice your reputation, your family's standing, everything you've worked to protect. Let me," his voice sharpened. "You don't get to make decisions for me, Verity. You don't get to decide what I'm willing to sacrifice or what price is too high. I am a grown man, a duke, and I am telling you that I want you. Not despite the scandal, not ignoring the complications. I want you fully, completely, with every imperfect piece of history you carry." "But your grandmother said." "My grandmother climbed into a carriage at 76 years old and spent 4 days searching coaching inns because she couldn't bear the thought of losing you." His forehead dropped to hers. "She told me something while we searched. She told me about her wedding portrait, about the merchant's daughter who proved everyone wrong. She told me you have that same fierce core." Verity's breath hitched. "She said that? She said you were an idiot for running, but an admirable idiot." His lips quirked. "I believe she meant it as a compliment." "Theron." His name caught in her throat. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to believe I deserve it." "Then let me believe for both of us. Let me spend the rest of our lives convincing you." His hands tightened on her face. "But only if you stop running. Only if you come home." Home. The word pierced something deep inside her, a longing she'd buried so thoroughly she'd forgotten it existed. Home wasn't a place. It had never been a place. Home was being seen, being known, being loved exactly as she was. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I. But I'm more scared of living without you." His eyes searched hers. "Stay, Verity. Fight for this. Fight for us." In the gray light of a boarding house room, miles from London and everything familiar, Verity Ashford finally stopped running. "Yes," she said. "I'll stay." When he kissed her, it tasted like homecoming. The journey back to London was nothing like the flight from it. Theron refused to let her out of his sight, keeping her hand clasped in his throughout the carriage ride, as if afraid she might dissolve like morning mist. Cosima chattered constantly, filling silences with observations about countryside and commentary on passing villages, but her eyes kept drifting to Verity with an expression of fierce protectiveness. And the dowager, impossible, imperious Augustina Vane, sat across from them with her hands folded in her lap, and her ancient eyes missing nothing. "You gave me quite a chase, Miss Ashford," she said finally, breaking into Cosima's monologue about hedge formations. Verity lifted her chin. "I believed I was doing what was best for the family." "You believed wrong." But there was no heat in the dowager's voice. "Though I'll admit, your instinct to protect Theron rather than cling to advantage speaks well of your character. I thought your letter was sincere. It was a test, a cruel one. The cruelest tests reveal the truest character." The dowager's gaze was steady. "You chose his welfare over your own desires. That's not nothing, Miss Ashford." Verity thought of everything she'd endured in the past week. Grief, exposure, flight, the aching certainty that she was unworthy of happiness. It felt like nothing. It felt like surrender. "No." The dowager's voice softened fractionally. "Surrender would have been staying to protect yourself. Leaving required courage. Returning requires even more. Then I hope I have enough. We'll see." The dowager reached into her reticule and produced something that made Verity's heart stop. The ring. The diamond ring she'd hidden in her valise and left behind when she fled. I believe this belongs to you. I never earned it. Earning isn't always about triumph. The dowager pressed the ring into her palm. Sometimes, it's about surviving the fire and coming back anyway. Verity looked at the diamonds, generations of Ashworth women contained in gold and stone, and felt the weight of what she was accepting. "Thank you," she whispered, "for coming after me. Thank my grandson. He would have torn England apart to find you." The dowager's lips curved into something approaching a smile. "I merely provided geographical suggestions." They arrived at Ashworth House as evening fell, the great building blazing with light as if in celebration. Word had spread. Verity could feel it in the servants' faces, carefully neutral, but clearly aware that something momentous had occurred. The whispers would follow, the speculation, the judgment. But when Theron led her through the entrance hall, his hand warm at the small of her back, she found she didn't care. "There's one more thing we need to do tonight," he said quietly. "Before we face society, before we announce anything officially." "What's that?" "I need to ask you properly." He stopped at the foot of the grand staircase, turning to face her. The ball was chaos. The declaration was reactive. I never actually asked the question that matters. Verity's breath caught. "Theron." He dropped to one knee, right there in the entrance hall, with servants watching, and his sister crying, and his grandmother observing with eagle eyes. "Verity Ashford." His voice was steady, his gray eyes bright with emotion. "You appeared in my life like a ghost I didn't know I was waiting for. You challenged me, surprised me, and made me feel things I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten they existed. You ran from me, which I'm going to hold against you for at least a decade. But you also came back. You came back." "I came back," she confirmed, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't have pretty words. I don't have poetry. I only have the truth, which is that I love you beyond reason, beyond propriety, beyond anything I've ever felt for another human being." He reached for her hand. "Will you marry me? Not because it was announced at a ball, not because society expects it, but because you want to spend your life with a frequently difficult duke who will worship you until his last breath." Verity thought of everything that had led to this moment. The alcove at Hartwell Manor, the library kisses, the dowager's tests, the grief and the fear and the desperate flight into darkness. And then she thought of this, a man on his knees before her, offering not just his name, but his heart. "Yes," she said, 1,000 times and more, yes. He surged to his feet, lifting her off the ground as he kissed her. Cosima cheered. Somewhere behind them, a footman dropped a tray, and the Dowager Duchess of Ashworth actually laughed, a sound so rare that the servants would whisper about it for years. "Welcome to the family," Augustina said when they finally separated. "Officially, this time. No more tests." "Thank you, Your Grace." "Don't thank me yet. You still have to survive the wedding." But there was warmth beneath the warning, and when the Dowager embraced her, stiffly, briefly, but genuinely, Verity felt something crack open in her chest. Belonging. This was what belonging felt like. "Come," Theron said, tucking her against his side. "We have a wedding to plan, a scandal to weather, and approximately 300 apology letters to write." 300? Everyone we've ever met will have questions. Best to get ahead of the narrative. Verity laughed, the first real laugh in what felt like forever. "I don't know how to be a duchess. Neither did my grandmother once, neither did my mother." His voice softened. "You'll learn. We'll learn together. Together." The word wrapped around her like a promise. She was no longer invisible, no longer running, no longer alone. She was home. 3 weeks. That was all the time between the Duke of Ashworth's announcement at his ball and the wedding that would set London ablaze with speculation. 3 weeks to commission a gown, address invitations, manage a scandal that showed no signs of dying down. 3 weeks of columnists questioning her worth, society matrons debating her suitability, and Lady Octavia Mercer spreading poison wherever she went. Verity weathered it all with a composure that surprised even herself. "You're handling this remarkably well," Cosima observed the morning of the wedding, watching maids flutter around Verity like anxious butterflies. "I expected at least 3 nervous collapses by now." "I've already done my collapsing." Verity smiled at her reflection. The ivory silk gown, the family pearls, the woman who stared back with eyes that had stopped looking haunted. Running away rather took the edge off the anxiety. "Speaking of running," Cosima pressed something into her hand. "From grandmother. She said you'd know what it meant." It was a small portrait, no larger than Verity's palm. The Dowager's wedding painting, rendered in miniature. On the back, someone had written in elegant script, "For the next woman brave enough to stay." Verity's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "She's rather wonderful, isn't she? Beneath all the terrifying exterior." "Don't tell her that. Her head is quite large enough already." The ceremony took place in the Ashworth Chapel, a jewel-box space of candlelight and stained glass. The pews were filled with London's finest, some supportive, some merely curious, all watching with the focused attention of an audience at the theater. Verity barely saw them. She saw only Theron, waiting at the altar in his formal best, watching her approach with an expression that made her heart stutter. He looked at her like she was a miracle, like she was the answer to prayers he'd stopped believing in. She reached him, took his hands, and found herself smiling so wide her face ached. "You came," he murmured, low enough for only her to hear. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought nothing could stop you, but I'm relieved to have confirmation." The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and rings and the solemn weight of words that bound them together. When the bishop pronounced them husband and wife, the chapel erupted in applause that seemed to shake the ancient stones. But Verity heard only Theron's voice as he leaned close. "Mine. Finally. Properly. Completely mine." "Yours," she agreed, "though I expect the same claim in reverse. Forever and always." He kissed her, and the world fell away. The wedding breakfast was an extravaganza of champagne and congratulations. Verity floated through it on a cloud of disbelief, accepting well-wishes from people whose names she couldn't remember, and answering the same questions until her throat ached. But through it all, Theron stayed at her side, his hand at her back, his eyes finding hers across crowded conversations, his presence an anchor in the storm of celebration. It was nearly evening when the Dowager finally cornered them, champagne glass in hand, and satisfaction radiating from every pore. "Well," she said, "you've done it. Married the most talked-about woman in London, created a scandal that will fuel gossip for decades, and managed, somehow, to look happy about it." "I am happy, grandmother. I know. That's what makes this tolerable." The Dowager turned to Verity. "You handled yourself admirably, girl. The composure during the ceremony, the grace with the well-wishers. You might actually survive being a duchess. High praise from you, your grace. The highest I give. Don't expect it often." But there was a twinkle in those ancient eyes, and when the Dowager raised her glass in silent toast, Verity felt the last of her doubts dissolve. She belonged here. She had earned her place. And nothing, no scandal, no whisper, no Lady Octavia Mercer, could take that away. Later that night, alone at last in the ducal chambers, Verity stood at the window, watching moonlight silver the gardens below. "Penny for your thoughts." Theron appeared behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I was thinking about that first night, the dinner party at Hartwell Manor. When you tried desperately to disappear into a marble pillar. When you looked at me and decided I was worth seeing." She turned in his arms, facing him. "I never asked why. Of all the people in that room, why did you notice me?" He was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing circles on her hip. "Because you were the only one who wasn't trying to be noticed. Everyone else performed, smiled for attention, laughed for effect, positioned themselves for maximum visibility. But you," he shook his head, "you stood against that pillar, like you'd accepted your own invisibility, like you'd stopped hoping to be seen. And something in that resignation made me furious. Furious at a world that would make someone like you disappear. At a society that valued noise over substance. At myself, for being part of that system without questioning it." His forehead dropped to hers. "I looked at you and saw someone worth fighting for. Someone worth becoming better for." Verity's throat tightened. "You barely knew me." "I knew enough. I knew you were intelligent. The way your eyes tracked conversations, cataloged information, missed nothing despite pretending to see nothing. I knew you were strong. 3 hours standing in an alcove without complaint requires fortitude. And I knew you were beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with gowns or jewels." He kissed her softly. "I knew you were worth seeing. And now? Now I know I was right. Now I know I'm the luckiest man in England. Now I know that every scandal, every whisper, every moment of chaos was worth it for the privilege of calling you my wife." Verity kissed him then, not softly, but fiercely, with all the passion and fear and triumph of the past 3 weeks pouring through her. "I love you," she said against his lips. "I love you, and I'm done being invisible." His smile lit up the darkness. "Good, because I intend to spend the rest of our lives ensuring the entire world sees exactly how remarkable you are." 1 year later, the dinner party at Ashworth House was in full swing. 100 guests filled the renovated ballroom, their laughter echoing off walls that had witnessed generations of history. The dowager held court near the fireplace, regal. Cosima danced with her latest admirer, a charming viscount who wilted slightly under Theron's protective glare. And Verity, the Duchess of Ashworth, mistress of this house, mother to the child growing beneath her heart, stood exactly where she'd once stood at Hartwell Manor, in an alcove, against a pillar, watching. But everything else had changed. She watched her life unfold before her, the friends she'd made, the family she'd claimed, the husband who crossed the room toward her with a champagne glass and an expression of mock disapproval. "I told you to stop hiding in corners," he said, pressing the glass into her hand. "I'm not hiding. I'm observing. You're being nostalgic. Perhaps." She smiled, linking her arm through his. "I was thinking about the girl who stood invisible at Hartwell Manor, who thought visibility was danger and hoped only to survive." "And what would you tell her now?" Verity considered. A year of marriage, of learning to be a duchess, a year of love so overwhelming it sometimes frightened her, a year of being seen, truly, completely seen. "I would tell her that visibility isn't danger," she said finally. "It's courage. And that the right person won't make you visible to the world. They'll make you visible to yourself." Theron lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her wedding ring. "Have I mentioned recently that I love you?" "Not in the last hour. A grievous oversight. I love you, Verity Vane, more than words can capture." "Better." She leaned into him, feeling their child flutter beneath her heart. "I love you too, even when you're insufferable." "I'm never insufferable." "You're frequently insufferable, but you're also mine." "Forever," he agreed. They stood together in the alcove, the Duke and Duchess of Ashworth, watching their guests celebrate a life neither of them had dared to imagine. And when Verity caught the eye of a young woman standing alone by the far wall, someone's companion, someone's invisible necessity, she raised her glass in silent acknowledgement. "You are seen," that gesture said. "You matter. Don't give up." The young woman blinked, startled to be noticed. Then slowly she smiled back. Somewhere in the crowd, Cosima called for a toast. Champagne glasses rose. Laughter sparkled like the chandeliers above. And Verity Vane, who had once thought herself invisible, stood in the center of it all, radiant, loved, and finally, completely seen. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist. Because you believe in love that chooses courage over convenience, in characters who fight for happiness despite the odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I'm grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more romances with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.